Building permits and when building permits are required. Let's talk about it. Hello and welcome to Raw Architecture. My name is Andrew Hernandez. I'm a California licensed architect. Today we're going to take a look at the triggering requirements for a building permit, the types of building permits, and an example from a city website that goes through their specific building permits just as a general guideline. Next, we'll review work that does not require a building permit. And finally, we'll take a look at occupancy type and when an architect is required for a project. Now again, I'm a California licensed architect and this will be solely focused on California. But generally speaking, this is how most jurisdictions operate. Now, before we get started, I would like to invite you to the Amazon link below to check out my book, How to Become an Architect Without a Degree. It is a guide to understanding the entire architectural licensing process in North America. In this book, you will learn what an architect is, what an architect does, how much architects make, and of course, how to become an architect. If you're a parent, guardian, or guidance counselor, and with the holiday season coming up, it's a great gift idea for the soon-to-be graduate or anybody that's interested in architecture as a career. We also have other products available such as digital plan sets and AutoCAD templates. Check out the links in the description below. Okay, now we're going to look at what a building permit is and when a building permit is required, but just keep in mind these building permits are to enforce the building code. Okay, so I'm going to switch scenes here. And what we're going to look at is the City of San Diego's permits and approvals page. And we'll scroll down a little bit. I'll just go over a few of the listed permits that they have. But the main permit that most people will probably need to pull is a building permit if they're doing new construction or a remodel or a room addition for residential projects, or if they're doing any kind of non-residential project, this will require a building permit among some of the other building permit related items down here. So for example, we have a demolition permit, electric permit, fire permit, grading for moving earthwork. We have a mechanical permit. Let's say you're replacing your forced air unit or your HVAC system. That will require some inspections from the city to, again, ensure that the public health portion and the safety portion implemented correctly and installed correctly by licensed contractors. Let's see, if we scroll down a little bit more, we have plumbing and gas. That's more for like replacing a water heater. But again, generally speaking, if you're doing new construction, a major modification to the building, or doing a remodel, it's going to require some sort of building permit or some sort of ancillary satellite permit for some of the work that's being conducted. Okay, so let's get in to the main building permit here. Just again, this is for City of San Diego. So a building permit is required to construct any new structure, improve existing buildings or other structures. More common building permit applications for new or remodels to single dwelling units, multi-dwelling units, commercial, industrial buildings, and accessory buildings. Okay, now and at least for this city, under the building permits, depending on the type of building you're doing, you'll have a subsection of the pathing that you're going to take for starting the process for your building permit. So it says here, depending upon the scope of your project, you'll be required to select from the following list of building permit record types. Building construction, this is just for general building, combination building, which would mean electrical, mechanical, plumbing, and some of the other framing inspections among the other residential related inspections that are required. So you have single units, which would be a house, ADU, which is an accessory dwelling unit. That would be an example of a accessory structure to the main prime residence on a property. And you have duplexes, triplexes, and sometimes you have fourplexes. And it looks like this is new. I haven't seen this yet. This says professional certification program, same-day permit for office tenant improvement projects up to 20,000 square feet that are designed by a licensed California architect or engineer. After an application is submitted online, a virtual appointment is required to obtain the permit. For more information, check IB 150. This is typically IB, or it'll have SB, informational processing for it just describes like a ordinance that the city implemented and a route for you to take in order to accomplish either a permit or some sort of application and complete that in the manner which they deem is appropriate for that particular jurisdiction. Again, City of San Diego. So if we go back here, it looks like the City of San Diego is offering a very quick turnaround for very basic office tenant improvement projects in the City of San Diego are pretty common. Okay, if we scroll down a little bit further, it starts talking about the submittal requirements. So you know what kind of permit you have, you know what type of project you're doing, Now, how are you going to submit the project? And you have to meet all of these submittal requirements. So you need to package all the plans together. You need to get all the applications together. You need to get all of the related reports or other documentation required. Sometimes a title report is required. Sometimes a soils report is required. Title 24 calculations. So depending on the project and what's required, you'll put together this list of documents for the city to review your project for the building permit. And it goes over some more opportunities to quicken the process. You can expedite, probably for a higher fee. Never usually works out in my experience. It talks about the fees, and most cities will have a fee kind of breakdown. When are fees paid, submittal fees, insurance fees, optional fees, fire permits, and it just continues on, and you'll be opening your wallet more and more the more you get into this. Okay, so let's move on to some of the other permits you might encounter on a project. There are noise permits. Some areas of the city are heavily residential, and depending on the type of work you're doing, you might have a limitation on the timeline of when you can do the construction. So this would be a post-building permit, general contractor related construction phase permit, okay? Or let's say you need to get a demolition permit. Let's say you bought a house and it's in a normal neighborhood, but the house is old, it's not reusable, or maybe it's just too small and you want to scrape it. You need to get a demolition permit, deconstruction of that existing house. So the way that demolition works nowadays, so they more want you to disassemble the building versus just destroying it and making a big pile of trash where all kinds of dust and building materials are being thrown off into the air, or if it rains, being washed into the storm drain system. So we have to demolish buildings in a smart disassembly mindset. And along with that is keeping all of the material we possibly can on site, keeping the dust level down, and then making sure that none of the particles and none of the byproduct of the materials that have been disassembled or broken during demolition start washing into the storm drain system. So we have something called a silt fence, and we have different barriers that will contain all of the debris on site. In addition to that, we have to recycle a big percentage of the building materials. So the wood, some of the tar material, all the copper, some of the wiring can all be recycled to, create less waste in our landfills. Okay, moving on. Let's take a look at, how about a plumbing and gas permit? So if we go here, when we're talking about residential projects and we're getting a plumbing or gas permit, you're just swapping out a water heater, then you go and get a permit similar to this, a plumbing or gas permit. Some cities call it a water heater permit. Basically an application, you pay a fee. Once the water heater is installed, you call for inspection. And once again, this comes back to public health and safety. The city wants to make sure that the gas pipe heating the water in the water heater is connected correctly and that there are no leaks. And then similarly, they want to make sure that the water feeding the water heater is all connected correctly. And then the hot water going out is also being fed to the house correctly. Maybe you've seen videos of a gas leak at a residential house or any building. It will basically fill up the whole room, and then any spark, it'll just create a gigantic explosion. So these safety parameters are one of the reasons why some of this stuff is required to have a permit, so that it gets inspected, so that the city knows that it was installed by a licensed person that knows what they're doing and knows how to install the piping correctly. So what type of work does not require a building permit? Now, again, this is generally speaking, every jurisdiction is going to be different. Anything that is just finishes, fixtures, repairs, or replacements, those typically will not require a building permit. But if you're completely moving plumbing fixtures, completely moving drain fixtures that have to be trenched across the slab, those things would require a building permit. Remodeling an entire bathroom and all the fixtures are staying in place, you're just putting in brand new stuff, that typically would not require a building permit. But it just depends. In California where I'm at, I see projects get tagged all the time. Hey, you need to apply for a building permit, even though they're just doing a remodel. And it could be as simple as just going to the city and letting them know, hey, we're just doing this, we're just doing that, and we don't need a building permit for this. Alternatively, if you're doing a bunch of work that does need a building permit, you might get hit with some fees or fines. So a good rule of thumb, fixtures, finishes that are not being moved, or anything cosmetic and non-structural, generally don't need a permit, but always check with your local jurisdiction. You can just pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm planning on doing this, and does it require a building permit? And usually the building department will be pretty informative on that. Okay. Not all permits require a set of drawings or a set of plans. So sometimes it's just an application and you pay a fee, and all the city cares about is collecting their portion of the money and making sure that the inspector can go out there and take a look at the work that you're doing. Okay, which leads me to, when is an architect required on a project and when is an architect not required on a project? And very briefly, understanding of what an architect is in the United States: a licensed architect and an architect are the exact same thing. You cannot call yourself an architect without being licensed. Those terms are interchangeable. So when someone says a licensed architect or they say an architect, they mean the same thing. They're synonymous. A non-architect, like I just mentioned, is a non-licensed person or an unlicensed person, and they are allowed to do some design, some construction design, but it's limited to very basic residential projects. And this is from the California Architects Board, and it says unlicensed person. Here we go. They are allowed to design single-family dwellings of wood frame construction, not more than 2 stories, and a basement in height. They're allowed to do multiple dwellings containing no more than 4 dwelling units. That would be like a fourplex of wood construction, not more than 2 stories, and a basement in height, not more than 4 units per lot. Other structures would be an agricultural or ranch building, so perhaps a barn or anything that is non-conditioned space, maybe a shed or a horse corral, something like that. And then they have 2 more categories here. It says non-structural or seismic storefronts, interior alterations or additions, fixtures, cabinet work, furniture, or other appliances or equipment, including non-structural or non-seismic work necessary to provide for their installation. This is a little bit more of a broader category, some sort of interior design environment that is equipment related and not so much falling under the public health and safety aspect of the building code. Sometimes you have a storefront in a mall, for example. The structural integrity of the mall itself and where the Hot Topic store is within that mall, the Hot Topic glass and door to enter the store are not going to have a structural impact on the overall building itself. That integrity is already designed, so you're basically just plugging in windows and a door to gain access to the space. And finally, may not design any component that changes or affects the safety of the building, including but not limited to structural or seismic components. They're not allowed to design anything that is within the scope of public health and safety. And seismic components has to do with earthquakes. And this consumer guide goes on to talk about different aspects of hiring an architect, basic project, criteria for a project, and it's a little bit beyond the scope of this video. Maybe I'll go over this sometime, but it just talks about how to hire an architect and what the architect is required by law to do, and that is governed by the Architects Practice Act of California, or other states have similar laws, but every state is different and every architect is licensed by the state or the territory. We have 50 states obviously in the US, and we have 5 territories that also have licenses available for architects to practice under. Okay, so we just went over what a building permit is, when a building permit is required, and the types of projects that do not require an architect. So what kind of projects do require an architect? But first, let's go over use and occupancy type, and that will... Okay, again, we are talking about when an architect's required for a project, and projects fall into these buckets of occupancy type, and it basically informs the rest of the building code application to that project. So we just went over assembly, talk a little bit about business. Let's see, here are a few examples. We have banks, barber shop, beauty shop, car wash, post offices, print shops, professional services, architects, attorneys, dentists, those types of offices, radio, television stations, telephone exchange. Let's see, let's keep going down. Educational. This would be all your schools, colleges, elementary, middle, high school, colleges, daycare facilities. Let's move down to factory. Factory sounds pretty obvious to me. Anything that's, in a factory being manufactured. And we have high hazard. This is definitely something you want an architect involved in. We're talking about aerosols. Let's see, combustible fibers, combustible liquids, compressed gas, controlled environments, cryogenic fluid, detonation. All of these have different fire classifications as well, and how to mitigate those fires. Sometimes you can't just throw water on any type of fire. If it's a certain type of chemical fire, you have to use a certain type of chemical to counteract that. So the fire suppression system has to be designed specifically for that chemical compound to be put out or diluted or whatever needs to be done to take that chemical situation from a dangerous one to a non-dangerous situation, so that again the occupants can escape the building safely. Institutional, mercantile, residential, storage, utility, laboratory, And basically, once you identify the type of project you're doing, you apply the type of occupancy that it is. And throughout the building code, you'll have different requirements for that occupancy. And the architect's main job is to apply those portions of the building code to your specific project to make sure that all of the design complies. Okay, now very quickly, there are examples of non-residential projects not having an architect of record, even though it's required. Some project types have exceptions, and some of the exceptions are a licensed contractor being the person of record, or a civil engineer or structural engineer can be the person of record. But that does not exempt them from following the building code, putting all of the components that are required for building code compliance in the plan set. And of course, they're not exempt from any of the inspections that are required during a construction phase. That's it. Thank you for watching. I hope this video helps you have a better understanding of the building permit and when building permits are required, and who is required to be involved for different building permit types. I would love to answer any questions you may have. I know this is a very general video, but I'm talking to a sort of general audience. So if you have a specific question, I would love to take it. I could probably answer it in the comment below. Again, thank you for watching, and I would like to invite you to support this channel further by subscribing, hitting the thumbs up, or checking out the links in the description for our books and digital products. All right, I gotta go.